Functional notional is also an interesting approach of teaching grammar in ELT classrooms, and it is also slightly different from the typical deductive or inductive approaches. This approach is based on the belief that people who study, learn, or use a language, especially another language, they do that in order to see how that typical language can do different things or actions for them. What it means is that they do not learn language for its own sake, but rather they learn language to perform certain socio-cultural acts. So when they say something in a language, they actually perform something. It is also is based on the pragmatic explanation of language. They're interested in how they can do various things, how can they perform certain actions, and while doing that they can make and convey various meanings to other people. And the language overall is a way or a means to get things done for themselves. A grammar which puts various patterns of language together and make it easy for the learners to use it for the performance of various communicative actions is called functional grammar. It organizes language on the patterns of various functions and communicative acts people usually perform. We could see an example of this approach in form of the explanations, which is based on speech acts in a typical linguistic course. Speech acts are those acts which are performed while we speak. For example, we request, we order in various situations, and these are the acts and many more which we perform through language. So functional notional approach is basically based on this philosophy that we should organize grammar also based on these various functions performed by language. Therefore, the major objective of this approach is to make people realize that how language could be used to live, and also it adopts both semantic and pragmatic view of language simultaneously, and do not consider semantics or pragmatics as extra levels of organization. Rather, they consider them as integral parts of language learning and organization. It also focuses on the communicative meanings which people are primarily interested while learning a language, and make people realize their importance also during the process of learning. And it also believes that language could be organized through notions which are quantity, location, and time, etc. And also through various functions, for example, making a request, orders, making offers, or apologizing. These are various functions we perform through languages. So language could be organized through notions and functions. Some of the relevant terms involved in this approach are notions. Notions are meaning elements or meaning-making elements which could be expressed through various nouns, adjectives, and adverbs. A notion roughly is a concept or idea. It may be specific and could be expressed in form of vocabulary items, for example, dog, house, and this concept may be general in sometimes when we talk about time, size, emotion. So it could be both specific and general. Maybe about the time past, for example, the expressions like in 1995 or last week, or in temporal clauses which begin with expressions like when, before, after. This is expressed, right? So in comparison, a function is some kind of speech act or communicative act which we perform through language. As I have already mentioned, that this may include the functions of requesting, ordering, apologizing, appealing, requesting, etc. Then a situation, it may affect the overall use of dialect or the nature of the use of language, for example, formality or informality, because it involves not only the people who are involved in a conversation, but also the situation or context in which they are using a language. So situation might compel two friends to speak formally when they are in a formal situation, in an academic or intellectual situation. In comparison, they might use quite an informal language when they are on street or in market with each other and having some kind of a chat. In front of you is a chart which tells us about various coordinating language categories, and we have in different sections the situations, topics, notions and functions, grammar, vocabulary. We could see there could be various situations, and these are only few in front of you. For example, there could be a situation getting to know someone, and the topics in such situations could be tastes, hobbies. People inquire about each other's hobbies and tastes. And there could be notions and functions of inquiring, informing, greeting. Grammar, which may be more useful in such situations or applicable, could be interrogative forms. For example, one person might inquire, what is your hobby? So he needs an interrogative form to inquire such things. And the vocabularies like sports name, swimming, etc. would be irrelevant, or the elements of greeting, which are generally popular in a culture. Similarly, there could be another situation if you just come down a second from bottom, planning a holiday. And in such situation, the topics could be like travel or accommodation. Then we have notions and functions in form of future time, predicting, suggesting, because we suggest or predict things in such situations. Future tense would be more appropriate for such functions. And vocabulary like train, plane, mode of traveling. Then the places for accommodation like hotel or camping could be more relevant. These are just few examples how students could be exposed to these various terms of functional approach. They might find it useful for their communication purposes. There is a criticism of this approach as well, because this approach may be difficult in terms of ordering that which functions should be introduced to students first and which must be introduced later, because all these functions may be relevant at the same time to young learners. So a teacher working under this approach may find it difficult to decide the order through which various functions or notions must be exposed to or introduced to students. It becomes a tricky job and a demanding job on the part of a teacher. And then it also involves a wide range of grammatical structures to be introduced to the students when we expose them to various language functions. Teacher might find it difficult to decide about these structures as well, and students would be simultaneously exposed to simple and complex structures which may become demanding on the part of students. And the random nature of language used in teaching functions may also be challenging for young learners. There definitely are certain advantages of this approach as well. For example, since this approach has been popular since 70s and 80s, many course books have started using some functional aspects of language learning in their exercises. We see that functional syllabus is being introduced along with the traditional grammar or vocabulary teaching. And one of the biggest advantages which may be attributed to this approach is that it teaches students some communicative aspects of language which were missing in traditional language teaching. And students could make use of those communicative aspects and can learn grammar as well as the communicative use of language simultaneously.